Gross profit. All right, let's rock in. So this is the second of the three metrics that we look at to triangulate acquisition. We started with CAC. You have to have cheap customers. We talked about the different ways to improve it, free or discount, different ways to display discounts. But now we're going to talk about gross profit. Okay, so we're going to define what it is, why it's important, examples, calculating, and improving it. All right, let's rock. So gross profit, the difference between the price and the cost of goods sold. So cost of goods, or COGS, is what it costs you to deliver the thing. All right, so if it costs me $9 to deliver meals and I sell it for 10, then I got $1 in gross profit. All right, very straightforward. Now, here's why this is important. So the problem is that most businesses think they need cheaper leads, when in reality, they need to make more money per customer. And so my observation is that the CAC, this is me like high level because I see lots of businesses. CAC between competitors is often fairly similar. So a lot of people are, obsessing about how they're like, they want to improve their ads and things like that. And sometimes you do need to do that. But the ranges are actually much tighter than you'd think. So you might see somebody who's, acquiring customers at $2,500, somebody else in the marketplace might be $3,500. Rarely would you see somebody at like $6,000 unless they're like just getting into the market. But the CAC for specific avatars is usually pretty tight in terms of ranges when I see many businesses in the same industry. Now that may surprise you, but that just like kind of is what it is. But the difference between how much money these companies make is often how much customers are worth. Now, that is where the huge discrepancy between businesses exists. So this is the difference between the whales and the minnows, is how much they make per customer, gross profit. All right. So let me tell you a quick story. So I did a consulting day years and years and years ago. It might have been the first 5 I've ever done my whole life. And a guy was in the same space as me. And you're like, wait, Alex, why would you help somebody who's a quote competitor? I don't see the world that way. So guy came in and he was selling the same number of units per month as me. All right. Same number of units per month as me. But I was making 56 times more profit than he was. That means 56 years of him making the amount of money that he made is what I made every year. And so he was making $300,000 a year in profit, and I was making $17 million a year in profit. Same number of units sold per month. And so the major difference is how much we made per customer. And so gross profit is the arms race of business, because the thing is the person who makes the most money can spend the most money. This is how you get an ethical monopoly. So like, you don't have a monopoly from, okay, I'm, I'm, you know, I'm somehow protecting like no one else can do business. You're saying you're welcome to do business, but I'm going to outspend you on all advertising channels. So for you to get your word out, you're going to have to outbid me. But because I created a better business model, I can outspend you. In the auction of attention, this is a Dan 1080 quote, he who can spend the most to acquire a customer wins. This is my version of the quote, which is what of course, I like my version. He who makes his customer worth more to his business than to his competition wins. I think about this in terms of what can I do? So rather than thinking, oh, I can spend, and I love Dan, to be very clear. He who can spend the most, it's what do I do in order to spend the most? What I do is I make my customer more valuable. The outcome of that input is that I can now spend more. So these are really just two parts to the same quote. If this is the precursor to this one, if that makes sense. All right, so that's why this is important. So let me give you an example. So I remember when I was at Smoothie King, I was a blender tender, and my buddy was reading this article in the back of the store, probably goofing off when we probably shouldn't have been. And he was like, dude, check this out. This guy bought a $50,000 burger. And we looked at it and it was like made of gold and whatever crazy Wall Street person bought a $50,000 burger, right? And and I was thinking about that, and I remember the article said something like he was making $50 million a year or something like that in income. And so what I ended up doing was I started looking at what it costs him in hours versus what it cost me in hours for the burger that I bought earlier that day. And so then I realized that my $13 burger was the same to me as this Wall Street guy's $50,000 burger, that it was actually the same level of inconsequential cost for him as it was for me. And arguably, this was more expensive for me than it was for him, just a normal burger. And so that concept basically is the reverse of the realization that you can only go down to zero. You can go infinitely high when it comes to lifetime value. And so, like, you can only drive down so far. right? On the cost side. But in terms of how much you can make, that's where you can be as creative as you want in terms to continue to increase the lifetime gross profit per customer. And so it can make something as insane as paying $50,000 for a burger or CAC actually still be relatively cheap for you if you know how to increase the value of the customer. And so think of the burgers as the commodity, which is traffic. Think of our income as the lifetime gross profit. If I were competing with this guy, he would be able to outspend me 3,700 times over. And in the auction of attention, he would outbid me every time. And our goal is to do the same to our competitors. All right, so you need to look at both sides, getting customers for less, but also making them worth more. All right, and before we improve it, we got to know how to calculate it. So here's gross profit, how we calculate it. So here's a product example. So if I sell a widget for $100, it costs me $20 to manufacture it and ship the widget to the end customer. All right, so my gross profit is 100, where it is, 100 minus 20, $80. This is what's left over. This is my gross profit. Okay. Here's a service example. Let's say I deliver services monthly and I have one account representative per 10 customers. If my clients pay me $3,000 per month each and my reps cost me $6,000 per month, we can then figure out the gross profit margin. Okay, so the rep salary is $6,000. The clients per rep is 10. The cost per client means it's $600 per client. Remember, we make $6,000 divided by 10 clients, $600 per client. Gross profit, all right, is now $3,000, what they pay us, minus my cost per client, which means $2,400 left over. The reason I'm going through this is that many of you guys watching this are service-based businesses and don't know your costs. These are your costs. So my gross margins are $2,400 divided by $3,000, which is 80%. Rule of thumb from Alex: if you run a service-based business, local brick and mortar or national, you want at least an 80% gross profit margin. Now that may sound crazy to you, but it is very unlikely that you will scale in service unless you have 80 or higher. So not just 80, that means that if it costs you 100, you got to sell it for 500. Now, you might think, because if you're a newer business owner, you're like, no, that seems unreasonable. That's your gross profit, not your net profit. You still have rent. You've got your fixed admin costs. You've got insurance. You've got utilities. You've got break fix that happens within your business. You've got all these other costs that go into doing business. You're not running 80% net margins. You're just saying, this is now all the money I have left over to run the rest. I still got to spend advertising dollars. Like, there's all this money that I still got to spend. And so if you're at 80, you might be running a 30% net margin business, right? So just to give you context on this. Okay. And so the pro tip is that gross margin equals gross profit times 100%. So if you ever hear me say gross profit versus gross margin, it's just, this is a percentage, this is an absolute. That's all it is. So gross profit's the absolute, gross margin is the percentage. That's all it is. Okay. So if I say it's $80 in gross profit, it's 80% gross margins. I clarify this because if you've ever like read stuff and been like, wait a second, is this different? It's just a different way of measuring the same thing. That's all it is. All right, cool. So big picture, this is what the business was. This is the example I gave visually. This is the correct visual. All right. And you can note that gross profit is not net profit. All right. This is the cost limited to what the business incurs directly from delivering the thing. So if you had an administrative assistant and you sell cups for $10 that cost you $2, we wouldn't factor in your administrative assistant into the $8 of gross profit. It's off the gross profit that we eventually pay for everything else in the business to create our net profit, aka what's left over at the end of the month. All right, so your rent doesn't go into your gross profit. Your admin costs don't go into your gross profit. Your utilities don't go into your gross profit. It's just the cost of, okay, if I sold another one of these, if I sold another customer, what are the variable costs? What are the costs that go up per unit sold? If your rent doesn't go up per unit sold, if your admin cost doesn't go up per unit sold, then it is not factored into gross profit. But if my hard cost of cups, if I sell another cup, I still have to incur that cost. If I have to sell another client, then a certain portion of my resources of client delivery is going to get allocated to that next client. Now, some people are like, wait, but I have to pay my person either way. Not really. I mean, you do up to 20 and then you have to hire another one. And so you just have to fractionalize it in terms of your thinking. So it may feel fixed, but it's not. You just have chunkier start stops more than it's a fixed cost, if that makes sense, when it comes to calculating this. So you're like, okay, got it. I have mine and mine sucks. So what do I do to improve it? So improving gross profit, there's a lot of ways to increase gross profits. But without altering price or cost structure, the three easiest to remember are more, better, new. All right, which is sell more of the stuff, so more quantity or duration of the thing, so get them to buy in bulk or buy again tomorrow. Sell a better quality version of the thing, so that would be like a regular burger versus an organic burger, or a large group versus personal training, better version of the thing, or sell a new thing. So you fries and a Coke, which then you could supersize on quantity and quality on top of that. That's the quick and dirty. We're going to get into lots of different versions of this. All right. So that is gross profit.